Okay, everybody. Good morning. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, past, present and future of the land we're having this meeting on. And I extend that thanks and acknowledgement to Aboriginal and Torres Strait people attending this forum. I'm James Mort, and on behalf of my fellow director, Sarah, I welcome you to the MiHaven Care SDA Forum, together with our special guest speaker, Anneke Andrews from Disability Specialists. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah and Anneke to take you through this session and what will be a very interesting and intriguing session on what is, I believe, a very interesting, confusing, frustrating realm of life. So, welcome and good luck, you two.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Morning, Anneke.
Good morning.
So we're sort of the bookends of today. I'll take sort of the lead facilitating role, and Anneka's going to fill in all the more technical parts of, from an OT perspective. The journey's been a really interesting, as James says, challenging. I call the NDAS like learning Latin. It's such a complex sort of language, but the more time you spend, the more you immerse yourselves, the more you sort of get to understand, and it all starts to make sense. So as we know, this has been the biggest social revolution ever in history. And that's a great thing. And as a community in Cairns, we've got a wonderful opportunity to do some really special things for people's lives and changing those lives. And from MiHaven's perspective, we are a social enterprise, B Corp registered globally, which means we're a business for purpose, for social good. So we really, with purpose, think about why we do things. And James and I have been building and developing for over 35 years collectively. And what happened to me was I was called by ARC. Natasha rang me about a year ago in July and said, would I attend one of the first disability network forums? And I said, sure. Why? And she said, we need somebody to start thinking about SDA housing for the community. So I went in there quite naively, but I do like challenges and I do like doing things which, puts us into purpose and collaborating with communities. And we'd recently just done something similar for access housing for women with domestic violence. So we actually raised a couple $1 million out of the government to do that, and that was the first in Cairns, maybe the first in Australia at the time. So it seemed to be a good fit for us. From that group, some people put their hands up and said, let's set up our own little SDA forum. Let's work out how we can set a goal to get the first SDA house built. Lynn rang me one day down at Mission Beach and said, hi, I'm Lynn. Sarah, help. My daughter needs a home. So I said to her, all right, let's make October 2020 as the target. I didn't know at the time that actually James and I would be the two people building that house for your daughter, but it's been such a pleasure and such an honour to do. So I just wanted to, we talked about a year ago the need to share what we know, because I know a little bit, you guys know bits and pieces, and if we can put the puzzle together, we can help each other through the journey of those who would be eligible to get the SDA. So that's just a little bit about who we are. Anneke, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Anneke from Disability Specialists. I've been a community occupational therapist for the last 15 years in the community. I've got a special interest in disability accommodation. My background is in law and mining, so I like to combine law, mining and health together for housing.
Which is a great combination of skills. I said to Anneke, what made you go into mining? Where's the relevance there? So tell me about that.
The adventure, of course, but also the design. When you walk into a mine, from the control room to the maintenance shed to the underground, there's elements of design everywhere, particularly ergonomics in the control room, layout and design in maintenance rooms to ensure that we reduce injury, and underground, all the things that are in housing as well, your lighting,
All those things that make you safe or unsafe. Yeah, cool. So a little bit about today. This is certainly not the order of the slides, but interestingly, we both went away and sort of did our own presentation. Then we spent all of Thursday night last week smashing each other's slides to pieces, going, I think we need to say this first and then we'll bring that in. So it's a bit of an evolution as to how we'll talk through the key points. So some of the highlights will be, why is SDA needed in Cairns? From Annike's point, from the OT point, the care and duty, negligence and scope of practice. What is an OT? What do they do? Why are they so important in this process of facilitating people into their housing plan, into their SDA home? The background to functional assessments, the language, SIL, ILO, SDA, what do they mean, the context of that. How do I access SDA? That's one of the key things we're going to try and break down today so people understand just the process to go through. And then finally, I suppose James and I will sort of take and explain, the SDI design process and all the things going on in the construction industry, which makes the houses really safe and robust, and there's a lot of changes going in that. So that's sort of the overview. We felt it was really important to bring back to the heart of what, the purpose of NDIS, which I know all of you would understand and believe in, but it really is this freedom of choice, transparency, trust, the opportunity of finally having independent living, but understanding what does independent living mean in the context of NDIS, and preserving people's rights and privacy and taking them through the journey. Is there anything do you want to add to that slide at all? And
they're the core factors of a good functional for SDA,
Okay, cool. So the little breakdowns of what is SIL, what is ILO, and what does SDA mean. We won't obviously go into lots of conversations about the different options in housing today because we could get bogged down for a few hours trying to explain. And there's a lot of changes going on recently, especially with the ILO. So I'm sure some of you have been attending different webinars around Australia where lots of other OTs and NDIS specialists are trying to explain how that works. But in these boxes, we've got the supported independent living. Anneke, do you want to go and explain a bit more about that? Most of you probably know about the SIL.
You did that part yesterday.
Did I? Oh, did I? This is my part.
Okay, where do we start? Supported independent living, similar to the old block funding like you used to have, but now obviously we need a good coordinator. There's lots of lovely coordinators in the room, I see, to get that person into SILs in the first place. You can explain that part.
Yeah, I mean the SIL then comes back into the SDA as well, but there's also the other models at the moment where there is currently SIL for clients who may not, they would have SDA at that time as well, wouldn't they?
Not always.
Not always, yes.
Usually they've got SIL before they have SDA.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. The individual living options, I don't know if many of you have been listening to that. That really, I think, evolved in June, July this year. And that's where people can actually independently sort of register to accommodate somebody with a disability in their own home. And then there's a whole program and sets of procedures and regulations that relates to that, but that's very new.
There's 4 areas of that you can apply for, but with each area there comes a lot of risk as well. Because it's within a home.
You're living in someone else's home. You're basically living in someone else's home who has to get themselves registered to be able to take you as their tenant. Core funding, home modification. So obviously people have the choice to, if they've had a change of circumstance and they want to go back to their home, they can apply through their support coordinator and their OT to look at doing an extensive home modification. That has lots of challenges in itself. You know, if you look at a lot of properties on a practical point of view, if you look at properties in Cairns, which are very much high set because of the flood issues up here and the old Queenslanders, you might turn around and look at that house and say, well, is it really going to be an appropriate house to actually do a home modification to, and the cost of actually making that compliant, whereas sort of in a more traditional sort of city context in the outer suburbs where the land is flat and it's not subject to, you know, flooding, you'll probably find it an easier thing to do. But then, as James would say, if it's a block construction, the cost of knocking out walls and structural walls to make those door openings wider and functional can be incredibly expensive. So you could be looking up to $200,000 to renovate maybe a house here that's worth $300,000 or $400,000 to make it functional. So I think there will be quite a lot of challenges in justifying it with the scheme as to the, because it's a real test about value for money at the same time, as to how you expend that money. And we're also finding with a number of clients we're meeting recently where they think they'd like to go and do a home modification and go back to the family, but if we gave them the other option of having a brand new SDA home which has got purpose-built, everything you need, it may be actually a better option, a better outcome.
Yeah, home modifications are a bit hit and miss. As an OT that's done over 200 in the community, OT is a very glamorous job, sitting beside toilets measuring up, as we know. We have some OTs in the audience. So yeah, it's very 50-50 with respect to the approvals.
Yep. So following on to that, so I sort of said to Anneke, before we go into a lot of the OT nitty-gritty and functional assessments, I felt that from all the conversations I've been having with support coordinators for the last 12 months, the core sort of test is the eligibility for the SDA. So just as we know that there's now, let me get the numbers, over 3,000 people I believe have now got an NDA plan in Cairns. 6 months ago that was about 2,200, and they're saying that they're expecting that to increase by another 400 to 500. So by next year we're probably looking at about 3,500 people who have got have got NDAS plans approved. As you know, with those plans, they are constantly reviewed and there's change of circumstances. But just because you have an NDAS plan doesn't necessarily mean you will step straight into being eligible to have what we call SDA housing. So there are two key core tests in assessing your if you are going to be eligible to actually consider wanting to have the housing. So you could say, I want the aspiration of moving away from home. I want to leave my parents and I actually want to go and live independently. And that's very much within the goal setting that we know that you have in the plans. But unfortunately, it may not actually match to what the NDIS is expecting as to, you know, on that journey as to what that physical requirement is, as to then assessing that person, saying, yeah, for all these other reasons, apart from the aspiration of wanting your own home and living independently, does it also fall into these two key tests? So the two key tests are extreme functional impairment and having very high support needs. The other, and we'll go through and I'll get Anneke to talk about, you know, what does that mean about extreme functional impairment or very high support needs. But in addition to that, and I know that some people here from Department of Housing, you also have to, as support coordinators, you need to go and test the market to say, are there acceptable mainstream housing options in our community first up? And the panel will expect you to have that evidence and assess that to see if that's a reality or not. So that's also a very key thing to be looking at. We know in Cairns we do have a housing crisis. Just mainstream housing before COVID hit, we had 1% vacancy rate in the rental market. And James and I have done a lot of sort of community work with Access. We know that there's over 2,000 people homeless in Cairns, and that is growing at least 20% per annum. And just with COVID and construction, we haven't seen very much sort of medium and high density accommodation built here in the last 10 years, pretty much since the GFC. So we do have a housing shortage here, so that's a really important thing to just be aware of, that availability and supply is quite short in the Cairns market, in mainstream.
These two eligibility are taken directly from the new 2020 rules. Back one.
Do you want me to go back?
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, they're a lot easier to read these days than anyone that's read the old 2016 rules. It's a lot more user-friendly and easier to interpret for when you're doing your SDA plans.
Next one. Me? Okay. So what's extreme functional impairment? The participant's impairment results in an extremely reduced functional capacity of the participant to undertake one or more of the activities of mobility, self-care or self-management. The participants have a very high need for person-to-person supports in undertaking any activity, even with assistive technology, equipment or home modifications. So some examples are just getting in and out of bed, from bed to going to the bathroom, getting dressed, just moving around the house, moving around just, in normal life. The inability to be able to prepare meals independently, and just accessing the community independently. So that's in a general sort of sum, but I'm sure, Anneke, as an OT, you'd see all sorts of different types of disability, and some people have a whole multitude of different issues as to what would be affecting their functional impairment.
And probably the best example of this would be where we are right now, your spinal injuries and your double amputees, that despite a good environment, good equipment, good design, good support workers, they still need a lot of one-on-one support.
And the other key for us, especially from the design point of view, is we would pretty much identify most people falling into the extreme functional impairment would require a hoist. So they're not able to get from the bed to the bathroom or just get themselves from their chair into their bed. So very important for us from a design point of view as to how we design the houses. The other category here is, what are very high support needs. So that being the second category of what NDIS looks as a key eligibility requirement. Do you want to discuss this one?
It's very open to interpretation, this one, depending on the condition, and it is case by case specific. Who meets this? Yeah.
But it would, okay, so some examples I've seen, just because from going through the assessments, is there would be people who have been living with their parents for a long time, and their parents have got to a certain age where they no longer can assist them. They may have been, brothers and sisters also when they were young growing up, and then they've moved on, left home, got married, left Cairns, whatever. So you've got a situation with the one child still at home with the ageing parents, and then there can be circumstances that can change very dramatically with the onset of dementia or whatever to the parents, where suddenly that daughter or son is not able to be looked after, and therefore we've really got to think about an appropriate place for them to go. And as we know, one of the key places we don't want anyone to go is into respite or aged care. And up until we had the NDIS scheme and the ability to get SDA funding, they were really the only choices for a lot of people to go to. So that's one of the key objectives is getting people out of aged care at the moment. We have a number of people who are currently in aged care who are eligible for SDA funding, and we are building for them. They also could be in the old group home situation, as I said before, the residential aged care, and they've been in those situations for so long that they've lost the ability to even know how to get back into normal functional living. And as we know, a number of clients with COVID have been in aged care for a long time this year, where they didn't get any interaction with their family or their support carers because of all the restrictions, and their health deteriorated and they weren't getting the same exercise and the same support. So we've seen a critical need to really facilitate and fast track a lot of those people's SDA plans to get them into the housing. So, Anneke, this one is yours. I mean, I can talk about why SDA is needed in Cairns just from an NDIS perspective. So statistically, the data that's often referenced is we're saying of all the people with an NDIS plan across Australia, approximately 6% of everybody with NDIS would actually probably appear to fit the eligibility to be approved for SDA. So it's a small number. So in Cairns, we're looking at 3,000 people with NDIS plans currently. I would estimate that we're probably looking at no more than maybe 200 people in the community that would fall into the category of having the ability to get SDA funding. But you know more than I do about behind the scenes before the NDIS was rolled out and, you know, what was happening in the housing.
So that was called the local home truths for a reason. I'm making it quite specific to Cairns for today. Cairns has been in an accommodation crisis ever since I was a new graduate. I'm now a vintage OT, so that was a very long time ago. And what's happened is, like Sarah said, everyone was either going into aged care or out to Gordonvale. However, I know that many coordinators also here today, like myself, have taken their participants to accident and emergency due to neglect or in order to rehouse them, and that's when you get the term bed block. For those of you that aren't health, bed block is someone that's in hospital, and there are a lot of people that have been in hospital for a year and there's nowhere for them to go until a plan is worked out in the community. And sadly, thanks to MiHaven, that's why we're here today, because we now have those options, whereas before it was just nursing home.
Yeah, or going back to hospital.
Yeah.
And part of the networking groups that we've been working with, we've got a small cluster now working with the hospital with the discharge and with Yvette, the OT, which some of you would know well. And as we know, at any day of the week, there'd be up to 10 people who've been in Cairns-based hospital for over 2 years, waiting for somewhere to go. And that is costing us as a community about $1,200 a day for those beds. And last week the hospital was at 120% capacity. So we have, you know, there's a crisis just in the system of getting people out, and ideally working really at that early stage of finding the people to design the houses appropriately, and also finding them the right housemate and flatmates they want to live with. So back to you.
Cool. Can we just go back to the last one for a minute?
Oh yeah, go.
This is why design, environment, equipment and training is required. As OTs, it feels like we've been in a lot of Sills home, so we see the good and the bad and the ugly around town, and these are just some examples of when things do go wrong. So we call this a shearing injury, where someone's skin is rubbing against a wheelchair and needs to be picked up during, say, your shower inspections. Or sometimes we do positioning and seating plans in homes, and this is an example when it hasn't been followed and caused injury to the client.
Yeah, and as we were talking about yesterday, there's quite a few people at the moment that are probably in still accommodation, but that accommodation is not designed to any standard.
Yeah.
So the door opening into the bathroom is just standard narrow door opening. The bathroom's completely inappropriately designed. It's, you know, got the glass shower screen. It's a very unsafe environment, and in those situations, people are going to be prone to accidents and have, you know, a further risk of being in a worse situation. Yeah.
And I just want to raise some healthcare ethics 101 in the community, just because we're all working together and we all share information. Basic run through, what is consent? We all pull out that little bit of paper and get everyone to sign it because we have to. What is that though? Do we know what express consent is, implied consent? Do we know, is it in writing? For coordinators, you need to know all the types of consent, because I'll provide an example. I had a coordinator who had a participant with an intellectual disability sign the consent form, and the person said, well, that's okay by the NDIS, but when my auditor come along, they said, well, why did you get someone with an intellectual disability who doesn't understand your service agreement sign the consent form? That's not legal. So it's taken very seriously in the health field, especially if you work with the public guardian. They take it very seriously, as do we. So just a little reminder, also privacy and confidentiality. See a lot of emails pop around that have the client name and the subject heading. No go. Just a kind courtesy reminder, can we de-identify it, put their NDIS number, or refer to the body of text. And intellectual property, an example the other week, I was typing my own functional report, and from the medical documentation I had, I noticed that another clinician was using my template, which is not on. So intellectual property is all your marketing and your logos, everything associated to your business. So, you know, we chop and change jobs here in Cairns, so I do see people still sticking things on USB sticks. No. So just a general reminder of healthcare ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good point. This is another one for Anneke. Just, you know, what is an occupational therapist? And it's quite interesting to hear the background and history of how this particular expertise has evolved over time.
True.
Yeah.
I do have my fellow clinicians in the audience who will be making sure I get this right. You're welcome to speak up if you like. So by definition, these are the two definitions which you can read on screen. These are the 8 focus areas that you'll probably see within the functional reports that we write. But OT, why are we even here? What's an OT? Okay, to give you some background in a nutshell as to why we work in so many areas. Back in the 18th century, we had a guy called George Barton who was an architect, and he was injured and he was assisted by OTs in order to get better. Moving into the 19th century, we had world wars where all the soldiers were coming back from war. They were lying around with nothing to do, so occupational therapists assisted them with their rehabilitation. So that was the rehabilitation movement. Then moving on to today, that's why we've delved into so many areas. You'll see OTs working in rehab, lymphedema, oncology, hands, burns, till today.
And what I find interesting about it too is that the origin of that story, being an architect, is it's the spatial relationship to the healing process. And it's when Anneke met with James and I, and with Lynn and Bill, when we first started designing the first SDA houses, is a huge awareness of just understanding that everything you place in that house, the impact it's going to have on that particular person's disability, and thinking really clearly through that whole design process. So there is a massive co-design. I mean, we're very into this, the co-design, the relationship with the family who's going to be moving to this house, really understanding how that works. And you know, the talents of Anneke with the OT side of it has really sort of opened so many new ideas to us into a very intricate sort of detailed design requirement to make sure these houses are really going to be of the highest and best purpose. So.
And the difference again between physio and OT, the $1 million question. Physios deal mainly, they are masters of muscles, they are absolutely brilliant at what they do. OTs, we do muscles, bones, but we also do psychology and neuroscience, so that's why you see us doing a lot of the mental health stuff. That goes back to the way George Barton in the 1800s or the 18th century, where they had people chained to walls as therapy. He was the guy that said, hey, let's not chain people to walls because it's not good for their mental health. And here we are today, and so we do a bit of both, physical and cognitive. Yeah.
So this also just is an overview, and you could probably say that a lot of that was spelled out in that last slide, but that's also just showing the 8 core areas that the OTs are trained in.
And what is the functional assessment? The million-dollar question. So as coordinators, you call up all your OTs, they say, hey, I do this, I don't do this, and that all comes down to training. Where you were trained, where I was trained, it had a heavy focus on neuroscience, and also we had a housing component where you had to design a disability house to building standard, and you weren't allowed your OT degree until you had done that. So I guess that's a little bit of where my training and background comes from. And it depends what outcome you're seeking. Are you seeking a functional for a review? Are you going for an appeal? Do you want it for SILS? Are you wanting an SDA application? Make that known to your therapist, because we write according to that.
Covered? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nutshell. So, why am I here today as an OT in SDA? Again, I'd like to point out this picture.
It's not a MiHaven home, firstly. Just want to say.
And someone in the audience already knows this answer, so you're not allowed to answer this one. What's wrong with this disability home? This was approved in New South Wales, in Corlett, a place called Corlett.
Steps.
Yeah. And Sarah pointed out yesterday, surely there's a ramp up there, but no. The person has to go to the back door to enter their own home, which isn't very user-friendly, isn't it? Yeah.
So if we were building that, given that there must have been a flooding issue as to why that house is raised, James would have raised the land right up so it was all level, so you'd be walking in without any steps. It's another one?
This is actually a local design. I'm not going to say whose it is, but I was asked to come along and do the inspection after it was built, not before or prior. And what's wrong with this one?
The entranceway.
And what's specific?
So there's no pathway to the entranceway, and the doors don't look like they're wheelchair friendly.
So we've got our wheelchair coming onto grass and going through grass to get in the door. Yeah. Yeah.
You can climb in the window, yeah. And especially when it rains a little bit up here. Can you imagine how boggy that grass would be in your wheelchair? Anyway, yeah.
That's a good OT practical answer, Deborah, thank you.
And do you want to also just note about the other thing about internally?
Internally, obviously the bathroom wasn't disability friendly, it wasn't built to disability standard, and we had TVs affixed 3/4 of the way up the wall, so when someone if they got through the grass in their wheelchair, they'd be sitting in their lounge looking up at a screen. But not everyone has tilt on their wheelchairs, so yeah, sitting in your wheelchair looking up like that, causing contractures, yeah,
not good. Not a great outcome. So this is getting into sort of more the detailed design side and the building side, plus with also the OT. So I don't know how many of you are all aware of this, but there's pretty much 4 main categories as to what we see an SDA design or an SDA category that would come into someone's plan. I think before we even say that though, when you are doing, if someone identifies in those first 2 categories we talked about earlier this morning, and then the support coordinator, which will then be engaged to say, okay, this has been identified that that the client wants to have the aspiration of living in their own home. In your role, as you say, this is you'd be asked to do a different type of assessment because you're looking at the functional assessment as to what category of housing is going to be appropriate for that person. Correct? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So at the highest end, we have high physical support. High physical support really goes back to that first category of what we described of a person being in, the limitations of their ability, their need to have pretty much 24/7 care with the SIL provider. I think one of the key elements we will always see as the builder and from the OT is that person will require a hoist. From a building perspective, that's the highest level of building for us. So internally, James will make sure that in every bedroom that there are steel frames, structural support systems put in, so we can have the flexibility of working out what particular hoist system or what that looks like. That would be the key thing. The other key part of it too is from a building code classification, we will be building to a Class 1B or a Class 3. A Class 3 is almost to a commercial standard, which means you'll have fire sprinklers in the house, which you don't have. All you normally have in a normal home is the smoke alarm, whereas the fire sprinklers is a significant cost to the build. It's about $60,000 in the build. Not only that, there's about $10,000 per annum just in the servicing and maintenance of having fire sprinklers into the house. So they are the key, because from a fire perspective, you've got to be able to ensure that that person has got, James, you know more about this than I do, from a fire perspective, they've got X amount of time to be able to get out of the house. Yep. Then the next category down is what we call fully accessible. We would pretty much design to the same standard with fire sprinklers. I mean, we are going to do this anyway as a standard for us. We want our houses to be to the highest standard to allow the greatest flexibility of the participants we can accommodate in the future. But the key difference probably would be is they still have their fully accessible bathroom, all to the SDA design standards and also to the Australian standards, but they won't require a hoist, would be the key thing for us. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd see different in the assessment. Pretty much the same. Good. Yep. Then improved livability, as it says up here, it's housing designed to improve livability by incorporating a reasonable level of physical access and enhanced provision for people with intellectual or cognitive impairment. So we would probably see a number of clients who may have a combination of maybe autism with blindness, a sensory issue. We don't have to design those with the fire sprinklers, so it's a lower building requirement for us from a building code perspective, but we would still be very aware of making sure the surfaces are flat, that access is easy, there's no trip hazards. Yeah, so you physically wouldn't see that much difference when you're walking through our houses, but internally there'd be quite a lot of different design requirements that we don't need to be so stringent on. The next category is robust. So do you want to talk a little bit about robust for me?
Robust is a very specialised build. It requires high impact wall lining, soundproofing, laminated glass, and usually you're looking at your restricted practice clients. Not everyone falls under a restricted practice document. They are lengthy, as we know, and difficult to implement and really highly legislated, but they can also fall under cognitive behavioural therapies. So your ones with really challenging behaviours fit into the robust.
So currently in our pipeline, because we only just started back in July this year to actually start building, we haven't yet got robust under construction, but we're identifying with a number of support coordinators and OTs that there is very much high demand for that style of housing. But we will really want to do a lot of co-design with the support coordinators and the OTs to be a bit innovative into what that housing solution could look like. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And basic?
So there's another category if you look up the SDA guidelines, which is basic, but it really doesn't really mean very much. That would be just a standard home, and when you talk within the webinars and the specialists, they're saying that category is almost sort of disappearing off the system. Part of all of this for us too, from a building point of view, is there's obviously categories as to acknowledgement of location factor. So CANS will have a location loading of 1.2. It will also have if you're going to put the fire sprinklers in, we also get a loading for that. So it's acknowledgement about the extra cost to maintain those houses from the maintenance point of view. And then in each one of those categories, as you will see, the OT will see, and in that person's plan, it will then identify what category, but also it will identify the ratio of the housing. So there are, in the SDA guidelines, there's apartments, villa duplexes, houses, and that covers everything. Obviously in Cairns, James and I don't really feel like the apartment market's really the appropriate style of housing. You know, you have to have a lot of volume, and then you'd have to blend that volume with standard housing. We're really conservatively looking at what we believe is the more stylistic of housing we think is appropriate, which is your low density, single story, and you know, be mindful that the NDIS is an insurance scheme and money will be limited as we go. So we would probably typically see what we call a 3-to-1 or a 2-to-1 in our house design layout. So the 3-to-1 means that the extra room, the fourth room, is for the SIL provider, and the 2-to-1 also means that the extra room, the third bedroom, will be the dedicated facility, being the working office with a bathroom for the SIL provider. There'll be questions. We'll take questions once we get through all the slides. So I think that covered most things. Okay, so how do we access SDA? Anneke?
Oh, the $1 million question, hey? Obviously, we need some money in our plan in order to create a housing plan. There are quite savvy coordinators here in Cairns that I know are doing this, and the coordinator will then, if there is money in the plan budget, they'll liaise with an OT and get a good functional. Sarah?
Yeah. So this is where the block wall could be at times, trying to get through this. I've listened to a million different webinars from all sorts of housing specialists in Sydney, Melbourne. As we know, Cairns was like one of the last places to roll out, only 18 months ago. Melbourne, Geelong being the birthplace of where the NDIS is positioned. James and I have spent a lot of time connecting back to that network. We've got a lot of family also involved doing it down in Melbourne. And it's been a bit of an evolution up here, but I think the good thing about being the last to roll out is we can learn mistakes and learn from from what other developers and other support coordinators and OTs have experienced as to the challenges. The key, there's a lot of documents which we can share with you, and we'll have a slide giving you the links to it. And this is free information. Summer Foundation, which a lot of you will know about down in Melbourne, is one of the leading sort of advocates in the NDIS world. And they had some very helpful booklets which explain step by step in very plain English as to how do you write a housing plan, how do you do this, how do you do that. They use case notes from OTs, just giving you descriptive sort of guidance as to the processes and the language to be used. I really encourage everybody to, take that spare half an hour at the end of the day or on the weekend, whatever, to start reading through these documents, because it basically breaks down the myths as to how hard it is to write these plans. I've had a number of support coordinators ring me in the last few months going, oh wow, I just didn't realise how much work there was to get this plan going. And it's like anything, when you're trying to do a new subject or something, your brain just gets blocked and you think this is all too hard. Look, it is challenging and it is a bit of work, but once you learn your way through the language and understand what the panel's looking for, it's like preparing for an exam. You'll find your way. But some of the key things from just out of the Summer Foundation guideline for how to create a housing plan, which I'll just read out to you. It says, the SDA panel prefers clear, concise, unbiased housing plans. Therefore, it's important you keep the housing plan as short and to the point as possible. There are some specialists I know down south that would spend, 80 to 100 pages preparing a housing plan. Gets to the panel and they're just like, wow, I just want to get to the point. What are we trying to identify here? So they're meant to be concise. The other part of it is they don't want to see emotive language. So using sort of phrases like transforming a person's life, which we all know is what will be the net result, is not really helpful to the SDA panel assessing the housing plan. They really want you to stick to the facts. For example, you may say that appropriate housing would allow that person to move out of aged care. Pretty simple thing to say. So it's usually the most obvious things you can think of, which is actually all they really want to hear about. And the key is to present the facts as clearly as possible. So I'd say facts, not emotion, is probably the key takeaway on that. The other part that I've learned, you know, and the reasons why people like Anneke are great people to know, because Anneke was the first person with Lynn and Bill to get the first SDA plan approved in Cairns a year ago, which was pretty impressive, given the fact we had no guidance up here at the time. We didn't have any.
Feels longer,
we didn't have
doesn't
a
it?
we didn't have a network.
Longer.
We didn't have anybody to ring to say, how do we do this? How do we do that? So initially back in July, when I met with Lynn, we were talking about doing this forum. But I'm almost blessed when I woke up this morning thinking, I'm glad it's a year later, because I feel that we can speak with a little bit more knowledge. And we have the intelligence in this town. Yeah, it's been a long journey.
The application back then was about 80 pages.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, as you hear, when you talk to the NDAS, they'll give you guidance by saying, you know, when you're doing the functional assessment for someone getting SDA and the housing plan, don't copy and paste and repeat the two reports. Like, you know, just reference whatever the key parts in that report, the functional assessment, across to the housing plan. So as a support coordinator, just being mindful about how concise and to the point that the panel wants to see it. The other one is you want robust evidence. So quality evidence, quality OTs, quality assessment is key. I've had a couple of situations with the support coordinators where we've probably identified a young person with a complexity of disability, but still at home with parents who are still relatively quite young. Her aspiration was she wanted to move out, like her sisters had, to get her own home. But in fact, once it went to the panel, it was really not considered to be of those two high needs that we're talking about for the test. So, I mean, her circumstances physically might change with age, but at this point in time, the panel did not see that to be enough justification to say, yep, you need an SDA home.
And like you say, the panel are looking for facts. They're looking at location, ratios, value for money, how it implements with the client's goals. Yeah, there's so many factors to keep it really factual and non-emotive, like you say, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. And another key point, just from a support coordination point of view, is the guidelines talk about, where possible, use the person's own words and phrasing to bring them alive to the SDA panel. So as much as you don't want to do the emotive thing, but it's really important, and I've seen it with a number of clients where their life is so catastrophically changed that going back home is just not even an option for them, and yet they have such a strong desire to be independent, and it's proven that if they are given the opportunity to live into a purpose-designed SDA home, their life will improve, and that's the reason why we have it. Yeah.
And it's hard not to be emotive. We're in a healthcare profession, hey, so
I think I've never met a client that's not emotive about their own situation. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that they say use the client's own words.
I know, there's a bit of an oxymoron in that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think they're trying to avoid maybe the support coordinator using flowery language. However, I think you can be a bit more to the heart to the person's call. You know, yeah, I agree with you, 100%.
I think I was in my original one.
The other part of that too, just to share, because you know you may have clients where the participant might be living with ageing parents, and for whatever reason maybe they've had an early onset of dementia, gone into aged care, so they're not able then to speak on behalf of their child. You could also consider including some of the carer's statements, because the carer will know day in, day out what their issues are, because that's what they're looking for. Like, you know, what can they do, what can't they do, what does their day look like as far as their ability to function living independently. Would you agree?
Yeah. A lot don't even know SDA is an option out there.
Yeah.
In the rest times, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, did that cover everything else that you had on your bit to say? So yeah, investigating housing solutions, completing the assessments. I suppose a thing to share is, because I'm seeing it now when we're looking at reports coming through, a year ago there wasn't an SDA housing option to go to. So there were some developers from down south saying we're coming into Cairns, we're building SDA, but they were pretty pictures. I don't think they even had a DA or even the funding to start building. I think what the panel will see, if they know that the house has been built or in the pipeline of being built, there's also a better, opportunity of saying that that's going to get supported. So at the moment, when James and I really had to go out on a bit of a limb at the beginning of the year, when COVID sort of came out, we went, well, maybe 2 of the sites we're going to do medium density housing is probably a bit risky with the impact on the property market with COVID. Maybe it's time to think about what we could do with those 2 blocks of land and convert these to SDA. So we did go out and did Lee Street pretty much as, I wouldn't say definitely a spec, because we had been talking with 2 families, and we thought, well, maybe we should just abandon those plans and come back and do this SDA design. And then I needed to go out to market to say, well, actually I've got availability for another 2 beds. So very quickly they got filled up, whereas a year ago we only had 1 person with an SDA plan. We are finding that at the moment, for us, we're quite lucky that people who are identifying very strongly for SDA in the local market, given their circumstances, which will be stuck in aged care or stuck in Cairns Hospital, we're finding that their approvals are going through very quickly.
So you can start the house before you've got the approval?
Yeah. That's our risk. So we're taking the risk to build it. Yeah. Which is not ideal, but given the fact we've got 2 very good locations, and we already knew that we had 2 families that needed housing. So yeah, we could go and build 5 houses and go knocking on everyone's doors saying who wants to live here. But what we would encourage now is the matching process is just as important as the house design. So finding people who want it, because this model of SDA is like co-collective living. So you and I could say we're going to live together, and we're going to live together for the next 10 years, and you've got your room and your facility, your bathroom and your needs, whatever, and likewise. But you might be a smoker and I don't like smoking, so therefore I don't really want to live with you. So it gets down to really making sure that we're matching people up that are going to be compatible, who are going to want to live together.
So who is allowed to live in the SDA house with the participant? So can other family members live with them, or does there have to be other participants?
So under the SDA model, although there was a recent change in July which then said that a family member, a partner, could live with that person, but then us as the landlord of building the housing, we've got to be really aware about the other people living in that house. So it's very expensive to build an SDA house. It would probably be almost, 45% more? 30 to 40% more to build. There's a lot more maintenance in that house because of all the sort of assistive technology and the things that we have to think about putting in. Therefore, the way the scheme works is each person then is funded through their plan to pay towards that accommodation on a per annum, on a lease basis. So when we match you, then you'd also enter into an RTA lease or a rooming accommodation agreement for that room, and that is your lease. Just like we run student accommodation in Cairns, so every student that lives with us actually has an RTA lease or rooming accommodation agreement if they stay longer than 3 months, and they've got the same rights that we would have in normal rental markets. So in our case, we won't take a bond for SDA, but in the normal case, you'd pay your rental bond and you'd have all the same protection under the RTA leasing as to if you want to give notification to move out, all that flexibility would be the same. So in that instance, if you're renting with, like going back to when you left home and you've started your first transition out of home, it's a similar sort of model where you're sharing and living together. So it makes it financially quite challenging to be able to turn around and say, well, could we build that SDA house and could the family live there? But if they're not eligible to the draw, they don't have a plan, as you know. So it wouldn't be viable at all for the developer to be able to build that in that model. That's why you probably go back to the home modification option.
Married if you've got a partner or something.
Or you can look at independent living option. Yeah.
So ideally what you'll see in the SDA world is just a co-collective living model. So there's a lot of people who are single and have been single all their lives, and therefore it's really matching single to single. Yeah. And matching, and you know, mix. It doesn't. I wouldn't necessarily have all women living together. You know, you might have a couple of men with a female. The other key part of all of that then is the SIL role, because you can't have 3 or 4 SILs running the house. You can only have 1 SIL per house to manage that. So then, apart from the matching, then that whole relationship building between the participants is to also say, okay, are you happy to work with this SIL provider? Because they're the ones who are doing the rostering, the 24/7 support. That doesn't take away your day-to-day other carers, and I might get Brett. I mean, I'm happy today to sort of open this conversation up because I'm not the expert here, but that's sort of the way it will work.
And do you guys partner with SIL providers when you're building, or do you guys just build and then?
No, absolutely. So a SIL provider, I mean, the perfect world for me is if a SIL provider turned around and said, I've got 3 clients who we've been looking after for the last 10 years and they're all great mates and they'd love to live together. We go, great, that's the perfect solution. Yeah. Just like a support coordinator might say to me, I'm looking after 3 people who have been doing painting classes together every week and they've all become great friends. They may not all be a match, so one might have high physical support needs and the other one might be fully accessible, but we would still match them together. Yeah.
And could you build homes that if there was someone that was high, someone that was like robust or something, that you would build a particular room to the high and then the other room to a robust? Or?
We're finding maybe robust probably wouldn't mix in.
What's the question? Sorry, Caitlin.
Yeah.
It's my ears.
I was just saying, so for the builds, if you did have someone that are on 2 different levels, would you build like 1 bedroom for this person at this level and the other person at the lower level?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
That's just normally.
Oh, I just meant that as an example.
Yeah. Robust is probably the one that you just can't mix that because
What if it was like high versus
independent livable. Yeah. So we probably would design the house because these houses are built for life.
Yeah.
So the challenge as the builder and developer and the designer is to try and make sure that we are thinking outside the curve as far as innovation goes, to make sure these houses can be as adaptable as time goes. We're even talking to some people in the hospital last week that some of the clients are larger and so the wheelchair is 1 metre wide, but actually the code is 980. So we're already thinking internally, wow, we might have to start changing some of our door openings in order to accommodate some of these clients. But the standards, which are pretty robust, actually aren't even acknowledging that sort of change of circumstance, or the change of equipment might change the way that the house has to be designed.
So you'd end up building to whatever the highest need would be for that house rather than...
Potentially, yeah.
We're going to do questions at the end now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think we've got many slides to go through. So I went through the housing plan. I'll have the link for you, and you guys can all get the slides. So the Summit Foundation, look, it's pretty plain English. It's pretty easy to follow, and the more. I think with everybody, when I started last year at Mercy Care and with Lynn, whatever, once you broke the back of doing your first housing plan, it was like, I now get it. So it's just like learning something foreign, but once you master that, then you'll have that information and you'll be able to get through the system, I think.
And everyone's are different.
Exactly, everyone's are different. So that's what I'm referring to as some of the references, which have been shared before in many other webinars that I've attended. So, I'm assuming a lot of you probably have seen some of this stuff, but it is easy to follow, easy to get access, and we'll send that through. Okay, so what are we creating? This has been a really big, common word at the moment, pivot moment for MiHaven. James and I tend to throw, if we're going to get into it, we get very passionate about doing it properly. So we believe this is something we're dedicated for the next 3 to 5 years in doing and can. So we will design the houses, we will develop the houses, and we will look after the ongoing property management of the houses. So we will be involved all the way through. We will get to know the participants with you. We'll get to know all of you guys really well as support coordinators and SIL providers. And we're hoping that in the next, our target is really about $25 million worth of commitment so far that we would like to do. We won't just do Cairns. We're already talking with other families up in the Tablelands where there is no SDA down there. Catherine Coast, where James and I used to live for a long time, Innisfail, Mission Beach, Tully, Cargill, up to Mossman. All of those areas are going to need SDA accommodation. It might only be 1 or 2 houses. The challenge will obviously be with the sills, about servicing remote. Nicole, you've raised a number of times when we've done those sessions with the network that just what the NDA's writes for the cities doesn't necessarily translate so well in our community, and I think we need to encourage, this sort of forum where we can reflect and, every sort of 3 to 6 months we probably should get together and say, why can't we get housing into those locations, or where are the blockages, or where are the needs? Because it will be different as to how we service such a huge physical area in the region. And then also not acknowledging also the remote communities, the Indigenous communities in Yarrabah, up in the Cape. There's a lot of issues with land, that you don't have the title to the land in those communities. So how do we provide, an accommodation service that's going to be appropriate? So that's why I'm saying the scheme won't really reflect what we know, which is quite different in North Queensland as to housing solutions. So that's just a bit of a blah, blah, blah. As I said, we're committed to, we will build definitely to demand. So if we turn around and identified on our website, MiHaven Care, every couple of days I might get an expression of interest from a family member or a support coordinator or from a SIL saying, identifying someone who may be eligible for SDA, they may already have it in their plan, or the support coordinator just wants to have a conversation with us with the OT to say, do you think they would be eligible for it, rather than obviously going down and spending too much time on someone's plan or too much money if we think probably it's going to be a low chance. And as I said, it's also finding the appropriate location. So when I started about a year ago, I used to ring Lynn often and go, what about this location? No, too far away. Because public transport's bad here, the cost of taxis is expensive. You've got to be mindful about all the other bits and pieces in people's plans that makes it affordable as to where they want to be. And I suppose we did pick a couple of really key locations in the inner city of Cairns, which is close to a lot of the services like ARC, where participants go to, near the hospital, near the physios, near the city, near Cairns Central. So it's accessible, it's lifestyle. It's not to say we wouldn't go to the northern beaches or down the southern corridor, but we would just, think about the benefit of that location for the people living there as well, to make life easy. Property features, I'm going to just take you through a little couple of films of the houses we're currently building. I suppose our point of difference is also being really sustainable in our design. So this is not an SDA requirement at all, but we will be putting solar power into all of our houses, because we're mindful that when people are living there, they're paying the rent, and they're not paying the rent, the income comes out of their plan, but they're paying the outgoings, so they're paying the power. And we know the power is a problem, a cost, to all of us, especially in the wet season when you really need the air conditioning going 24/7. So we're trying to make the houses as energy efficient and cost effective for everybody that's going to live there for a long time. James and the design team have thought very much about soft flooring materials, in case someone fell, rather than tiles, which would be inappropriate. We are also strengthening all the walls so the houses can be adapted for those rooms. It is really important for us to identify people early in the design process. So depending if they're left functioning or right functioning, we might say that this layout with this room and this bathroom is going to be just easier for you and your carer. Given the fact we've built probably 100 houses in the tropics, we're very aware of the tropical climate we live in, so the ability of having an indoor-outdoor environment, that's why I wouldn't be keen on doing apartments up here, because we do spend most of our nights sitting outside eating, so we want to make sure that environment is as high quality as can be. Even landscaping, we'll have garden boxes which will be on casters, and vegetable gardens, so they could be at the wheelchair height, so the participants can create their gardens and things they want to do. Pet friendly, so I say that with a caution. Obviously, if you're matching people, you've got to make sure that the other housemate wants to have a Jack Russell in the house or wants to have a bird. Goldfish is probably an easy one, or a cat. So we need to work our way around that, and from a property management point of view, we would look at sort of just some policies and procedures on that, just to make sure everyone's going to be happy and looked after. Obviously NBN, we will be connecting the NBN to all the houses. The internet and all that sort of stuff is going to be really important for people's assisted technology. We basically create the shell. We'll be putting all the white goods in, the dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer. We'll even probably put the big TV in the main room. But most participants will then bring their specialist chairs, their beds, their TV for their own room, and we can work with the wardrobe design if it's going to be more user friendly, depending on what the disability will be. I think that covers most of the key things. Automated doors, obviously the front doors will be automated. There'll also be emergency buttons, James, in each person's room. For the support carer will have their own room with their own bathroom, and then the kitchen's all designed to a disability standard, so the wheelchair can get in under the bench, the oven door can open forwards. There'll be a drawer underneath the oven and the microwave, so if you're cooking you can lift your pan or whatever and put it down. The dining room table will be adjustable. I don't know if any of you guys have seen upstairs the apartments that Spinal Life have designed, but there's some great ideas that we've worked with looking at that as to what we can adapt for the house. But also, if you may have a great idea about interior design that would make people's lives more accessible, we would look at any innovation, because that's the A1 intelligence is going to be the biggest change in disability, in sort of improving people's lives independently. Our current project, so some of you might have seen 30 Liddy Street, which is on the corner of McLeod and Lily Street, right next to the Barrier Reef Medical Centre. What's great about that location, it's just so central. You've got Kalana Pharmacy next door, which is open 7 days a week. You're close to Brook Swimming Pool. You're close to Spinal Life, where some clients actually might come here for some of their activities. That is 2 houses we've just finishing. As I said, we made a goal last year for October, and we've achieved it. And we'll be settling everyone in the early weeks of November. So those 2 houses are 2-bedroom plus 1. They actually classify it as a villa duplex because the site was quite constrained. We couldn't get the separate access into each house. So there's a few sort of design categories that affect as to how we get our houses categorised. Once the house is built, it then gets put onto the SDA register. MiHaven is just the final process of becoming SDA registered, so those houses then get enrolled on the system. So if you look currently on the database, there is no SDA houses in Cairns that are registered. So this will be hopefully the first house to be registered. Stage 2 is Severn Street, Parramatta Park, which is near Upwood Street and Gatton Street. So that's quite a big site. That's about 1,000 square metres, and we're building 2 3-bedroom plus carers room. I forgot to say, Liddy Street's 100% committed. Severn Street, we're still looking for participants to move in. Those 2 houses will be high physical support, so the highest level. There'll be a class 3 classification, so they're fire sprinkled. Everyone's bedroom will have a sliding door onto their own deck with a shared outdoor area. If you drive past, it looks like a big construction site. Because of Cairns, everything's in the floodplain, so we've had to spend quite a lot of energy, effort with engineers to lift those houses out of the ground, at the same time get all the access and everything to the right standards. So it has been a pretty big job, hasn't it, James? But it's going to be great. It's going to be really good. So the third site that we've got in the pipeline is in Buchan Street. in Bungalow, which is close to Cairns Central. That's another site which is about 1,200 square metres. That has an existing duplex on it, like just the typical sort of duplex you see in Cairns. What I haven't mentioned today is there's another category of housing which most of you will know about, which is MTA and STA. So that's your medium-term accommodation and short-term accommodation. So that's, we thought ideally if we were getting a pipeline of clients that were going to be moving permanently into their home that we're purpose building, they could be in a stress situation of either being in hospital or in aged care. So we could take them in temporarily for up to 3 months while they move into their home. So that was the idea. But I am getting a lot of calls from support coordinators on a Friday night, sort of in a bit of a desperate situation, looking for emergency accommodation, because that is a shortage in Cairns. We do have student accommodation with disability bathrooms on the ground level, so given the shortage of international students at the moment, Stacey has been able to take a couple of people in recently in that situation, and just to trial out how we can do MTA. So we will have MTA probably by March next year, open, ready to go. And at the back of that block, we'll build a new 3-bedroom high physical support. So that's sort of where we are now, but it's really identifying people. We're already talking to a number of clients needing accommodation up on the Tablelands, so that will probably be next year, looking into that. But we will respond to the market and where the need is. So our website, which is mihavencare.com.au, we update pretty much every 2 weeks on the construction site. So we've got a webcam on the site so you can see it being built. Pretty much once it gets to lock up, you can't really see anything, so it's sort of more exciting at the very beginning. So there's a virtual tour of those 2 properties, which I can take you through now, if I get my IT worked out. Michael, do I need to double click?
Yeah. Just click it and then F.
Done.
Okay. Spacebar.
Spacer. So this little fly-through is of Lily Street. So that's coming in off Lily Street, where we've got the dedicated parking for the support carers. There'll be 2 ramps. There's a ramp down the side here and there's another ramp on the street front. So that's house 2 and that's house 1. As I said, this is actually designed as a duplex villa because of the sort of connection between the 2 houses. Those doors will be electric. Storage, I'll just stop there. So obviously we're mindful of most clients probably come with 2 wheelchairs. So as much as you're trying to design the house to be streamlined and smart, we're also thinking about, well, where do we store everything? So originally when we first started the design, where those 2 doors are was going to be the front entrance. And then we went, you know what, that's such an important space. We need to use everything wisely. So we changed the design and made that a store area, but also it could be a study area, it can be an art area, it can just sort of have a multi-purpose sort of use to it. As you see in the kitchen, you've got the bench tops, which have got the clearance underneath, so someone in a wheelchair can easily access the cooktop and the sink.
Will they be height adjustable?
They won't. That's all fixed, but the dining area will be height adjustable. This is taking you into one of the rooms. That will have a big wardrobe that you won't see at the moment, and then you're going into your bathroom. I have seen some plans where some developers have actually done shared bathrooms, but in our design we'll always make sure everyone has their own bathroom. So that's just the Lily Street sort of fly through. Michael, if I want to get to the next one. And where do I go there?
At the top.
This one?
MiHaven Care.
No.
Next tab.
That one?
The tab. The very top.
Oh, sorry, there. Do I need to go twice again?
Just move down and then press space.
Space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
F.
Yeah.
Space bar.
Getting there.
Space bar.
Spacebar. Okay, so this is the Seppin Street property, which is 2 houses, both 3-bedroom with the extra carers facility, driveway up the side. We've had to fill all the way through. We've had to raise the land by nearly 2 metres to get out of the flood levels. These houses are slightly bigger because they've got the extra room, and obviously it's just a bigger block of land, so we've got more outdoor area. We're also very cognizant about security, so there'll be electric gates, we'll have video intercom, privacy, and we'll really look after people's well-being as well as thinking about security. No, not on that design. Oh, we definitely could put cover road, but we wouldn't be going underground. Yeah, carport, it is. It has got a carport, yeah. The Lily Street, if you see at the moment, the roof's going over the moment, yeah. So on each bedroom, we try and give them a breakout area so they can actually go from their bedroom outside if they wanted to, rather than to the main house, so they just want a bit of privacy. So pretty much sums up our presentation for the morning. Thanks, everybody. So happy to answer any questions or share or people's experiences, or as I said, I'm not the expert with the NDIS at all. It's definitely just a major learning curve, but we are seeing more clients getting their plans approved, sometimes faster than we would expect, which is a great thing. And look, it's a personal journey, coming to find your own home, and that's something that James and I really love helping people sort of achieve, and that's why we're really committed to it. And we want great still support, we want great support coordinators working with us, and great OTs.
Well, thank you for bringing it to town, you two.
Thank you.
And your wonderful team as well. I know I was approached by many builders and developers who were just looking for cash and wanted contracts in place right from the start, and you guys aren't like that, so it's a pleasure to work with you. Yeah.
Thanks, Anneke. Okay. Any questions at all that anyone wants to ask? Anything? Anyone? Yes, go, Nicole.
Hi, I'm just wondering, what's an approximate time frame from the time that a participant might get the okay to have SDA put into their plan, and you being able to then purpose build for them to move in? So if I'm understanding right, some of them that you're building to purpose for clients that have already got SD in their pack. So what's that?
So I'd say
time frame?
The maximum would be like, say, 12 months. Lily Street, we started building July. We built that so quickly. And we were lucky because it was a dry season, and James has got 20 guys who are quite specialists, and they actually love that. The building team actually is really enjoying doing this because there is so much intricacy in every detail, like just getting the widths right. Like, you would fail over 5 mil in an SDA house. 1 mil, you will fail. So we're very mindful about that. That's a huge risk for us to get that wrong. But so I'd say at the moment we've got capacity to take people straight away. The Seppin Street houses will be finished in probably March, April. So I'd really encourage anybody that wants to speak to us afterwards. We've got a number of participants who have identified. Some of them are currently in accommodation that it's just not appropriate anymore, and the family just is desperate to get them out. A lot of families don't realise that it's available and that they can access it, and all they have to do is have a change of circumstance in their plan. So it's really about how quickly that support coordinator with the OT can get in and make that modification. It does help. So a year ago, you couldn't even say in the plan, so-and-so is going to this house, because that house didn't exist. No one could be identified. So I do know that the panel will probably tick another box by saying, oh, so-and-so has been identified to a MiHaven Care home in Cairns North or whatever. And so then they know that if the plan gets approved, that they will be able to be moving into that house, rather than just having it approved in their plan and it could be sitting there for 2 years dormant, plans not being accessed. So ideally what we want to do is have a pipeline of at least 10 people chugging along somewhere along the journey of either having an SDA plan or being clearly identified that they should get an SDA plan. As we know, there's been a backlog to get all the reports done. So Anneke, you might say, look, 2 or 3 months just to get an OT booked in to get that plan going, depending on demand. And there's only there's only a few handful of people that are really specialised in knowing how to do the functional assessments. And then as a support coordinator, you put into the system, and it's how much you just keep barking and ringing and, hello, it's me again, blah, 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 and just hopefully seeing that through. But I have seen, surprisingly, one client, we thought we had to do a full update or something, and then we got the call literally the next morning and the plan had been approved, because they're in aged care and their health was really deteriorating if we didn't get them out quickly, because they just weren't getting any exercise, nutrition, whatever, wasn't great. So yeah, so I think even I just in the last 2 days been really surprised. I've had a couple of calls from the NDIA saying we're fast tracking your SDA because we understand that this is the first house to be produced in Cairns, and it just wouldn't be right for us to be waiting 6 months to do that. Any questions?
So I'm new to this space, so you always retain ownership of the home per se, and they just have through their plan with the SDA?
So our model at the moment is we're setting up a fund with a social impact fund in Sydney with investors who have probably got about $60 million committed to building SDA housing in Australia. And so they've allocated X amount to work with our company. And we will be their representatives here for the property. So we did the same with the student accommodation. We got 2 social impact funds, and we established the student accommodation with their support financially. They will hold that for, as part of their portfolio, and then we will perform as the property manager and the builder through that relationship. Yeah.
And then if somebody goes into a 2-bedroom, I understand you're working with sills and you're trying to match, etc. But I'm just wondering about the autonomy of that one person, one resident, and how much say they have with regards to their flat management. If they, depending on their funding, how their funding might change. Does that relate to whether they're in a 1-bedroom or a 3-bedroom? And
so you could have funding. So you could have a situation where someone might have funding for 2-to-1, which is much higher than a 3-to-1. But I might turn around and say, look, we've only got the 3-to-1 house at the moment. Would that be a major issue for you to want to live with a third person rather than 2 people? So it's a matter of choice and a matter of demand and supply as well. So they may say, no, look, that's fine, because then out of the plan, we'll only get paid what a 3-to-1 would be anyway. So the NDAS wouldn't block that. Or you could have a change of circumstance where you may only have a 3-to-1 in your plan, but you could prove a change of circumstance to want to only live in a 2-to-1, and you'd have to go back with your support coordinator. And I mean, we know it's not an easy journey to get those justifications and changes through, but that's where I go back to saying quality of evidence, having a really strong report to explain. But we're currently running 135 beds student accommodation in 18 apartments. Every day of the week we've got to match 7 people to live together for up to a year. Uni students or itinerant workers coming in, and sure there's some issues, but then we've just got to work it through as to how we get on and respect and collaborate and as I say, who stole my peanut butter? So that and also from a property management point of view, to be an SDA property manager is far more demanding than just a property manager. You're not just looking at space or cleanliness, you're looking at, there's a requirement for us to be working back with the SIL and the participants every, I don't know, was it Stacey, every month or, quarterly. So we have to sit together and all go through and say how are we all getting on, are there any issues, you might say I can't stand such and such dog, it barks all night, I can't sleep, so you go, okay, we've got to work that out. Yeah.
So if someone decides they want to exit your SDA, they're in an RTA agreement, but how does that work with their SDA funding?
They won't lose it. So as you know, your SDA funding is for life. It's legislated. So so you have that. So you would just go through the normal process of an RTA lease of saying I want to break my lease. So we would find most people at the moment want to take a long lease because we're really building it as their home. So they might want a 5-year or a 10-year, but they know that if it doesn't work for them, that they had the right, like you and I would have under the RTA agreement, to be able to get out. But it's a hybrid model because also the SIL and the role of the SIL is very important to that because they're the key person in that house day in, day out. So, we will be really relying on our relationship with the SIL, like through a collaboration agreement, to make sure that everything's been maintained, that the house is clean, that everyone's happy, just happy homes. Yeah, so it's very people management focused.
So your Sarah Street property is 2 3-beds plus a carer. Is it one carer in each section or one carer in the middle and two?
No, you could have one carer in the middle in a different model. So like with the robust model, you could actually have, say, maybe a carer that's servicing, because in the robust you might want people, they really want to live on their own, like they don't want to be sharing. So there would be different models for that. But in the high physical support need...
So in the Severn Street specific one?
Yeah.
3 plus 1. And
3 plus 1, yeah. And it could be a different SIL for that house to that house, but it would only be one SIL because they have to run the roster system. Brett, do you want to talk about that at all, being a SIL provider?
Yeah.
Well, just how, I mean, you have to work with the participant in their plan. So say we had 3 people living in Severn Street and you were the SIL provider, then you would have to work with each one of those participants to create their own unique rostering system. Yep. Yeah.
So I guess the connecting point is why a lot of people haven't moved to SDA at this point, that connection, how to people connected when you've got a person with disability over here in hospital who's had a severe injury, another person over here, there's no one way of connecting 2 people to say, would you like to meet to see whether you'd like to live together? So sports coordinators are really critical in that role, but then you only have certain customers that you're working with, so that's the first bit that's a bit of a hurdle. Once you've connected, then say 2 individuals who want to share together, then you're working individually on designing a roster that meets their needs. So you're actually submitting a roster of the SIL quote as based on what does each individual need throughout 24 hours of the day. There might be times in the home where they might be having dinner together and the staffing might be combined, but then there might be times where they want to go out, one resident wants to go out to their art class, or they want to go out and hang out with friends at theatre on Friday night. So then you have one-to-one supports for that individual, and then you've got the community access component, the CP, community participation, where each individual can then choose other providers. So that's where they can say, I want to attend day services, or I want to go and participate in another program. So I'm going to put that into the SIL quote but I'll purchase supports from another provider during those times. So that's where the SIL is one provider for the household, but the CP hours are totally individualised.
Yeah. So a lot of clients have sort of said, oh, I don't want to lose my support carer. She's been with me for 5 years. So that won't happen. That person will still be that person during the day to take them out, go to the hairdresser or go shopping or whatever it is. Yeah. But it's really that 24/7 in the house situation of making.
Going off that again then, because there's two houses but it's on the same property, are you able to have two SIL providers?
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's got two carers.
Yeah, yeah. Because it comes down to this whole matching situation, and then those three participants with their support coordinators have to come to an agreement as to we're going to be happy with that SIL provider. And then that gets put into their plan, and obviously there's all review processes and all the checks and balances that happen there. Yeah, and then we would have a collaboration agreement with that SIL provider as well, because as the representative of the owners of the house, we have to make sure that everything's being properly maintained, safe, you know, if there's any issues, anything that's affecting people living there. Yeah.
We've got two support service providers. You can have 2, 3, 4 service providers in the same. The SIL is only the one.
Yes.
But your coordinated supports during the day.
Yeah.
I mean that could be 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
8 to 10 hours a day. Totally separate from the SIL. That you self-manage as a participant yourself and have a separate 2 or 3 service providers go to work, doing other stuff, doing other community participation stuff. So the SIL is just the overriding supports that you share. The rest of it you can do it without, virtually. It's nothing like the old London. Absolutely nothing. Go on to those days, that means.
Right, okay. So that's a good thing.
Can I ask then, for something that I am familiar with, like for example, Kutharinga, like Little Street when they have...
Well, Catherine's from Kutharinga. Yeah.
So how does this compare to Callahan Street, where you've got sort of independent homes, there's SIL, and they again have community support to go out, but the property's owned by Kutharinga, and Kutharinga provide the carers at the home.
So that used to be my house, I used to do a bit of support coordination for. So it is, that house in Callahan Street has a 2-bedroom with their own bathrooms and their own kitchen at the back. A carer is hold in the middle, and then the same at the front. Yeah. So it's basically 2 housemates at the back, 2 housemates at the front. But it is passes up 4 to 1.
So you can do 4 to 1.
Yes,
You can even see 6 to 1, but you wouldn't really, you wouldn't do it.
So there's 2 rooms at the back, 2 rooms at the front. So it is the 4-person SIL for that particular place. And then with that, so while we own the house and we do the rental for the house, if the 3 out of the 4 participants that live in that house decide they no longer want to be Kutharinga as their support provider in home, then we would no longer be the support provider for that home. So you have to have a majority rules of how many people who they want as the provider. So if 3 out of the 4 managers can't say, no, we want to go with XYZ Disability Services, then XYZ Disability Services would put in their tender, they take it over, they defend the owner system in there.
So is it still SDA?
That house is actually SDA registered, yes.
And so it's owned by Kutharinga and they've got SDA in their plans as opposed to like the group in Sydney.
Some of them do have SDA. I don't believe all of them have SDA in there, but all of them are eligible. But it is an SDA eligible house.
So it's not a case that the investors are building homes and then the participants are moving in. So the NDIS pay the investor a set amount each year based on their eligibility to then build that home and get that return for that investor.
So there's X amount of funding in certain participants' plans that they then pay to Kutharinga as the SDA registered house.
Which is
Yeah. So we're sort of evolving because Cootha Ring originally got a
That was
grant
before,
from the Queensland government before the NDAS came out. So they built pretty much the first model of that, and which helped acquire the land. And I know the build cost was really expensive at the time. And so we're an evolution from that, which is probably a more independent model, which is, we're not a not-for-profit, we're not associated with this. It would be really inappropriate for us to be a SIL as well as being the property owner for our model. We just want to be building it the best design to the highest standard architecturally, but then have really good property management systems, that everyone's happy, but then allowing the free market to, identify, who wants to live with who and, location and whatever, because that's going to be their home potentially for life. Yeah.
So the SDA application then essentially just gets a lump sum of money per year to pay to you.
Yes. So there's a drawdown out of their plan for it's rent basically. I use the word rent. They don't seem they call it income, whatever. But then there's also a so the rent. But it is quasi rent because it's coming straight out of their plan to pay for their accommodation.
The rental doesn't come out of their plan.
No, the rental does.
Pay rental.
Okay.
So the SDA in your plan.
So for a high difficult support, it's about $33,000 a year.
Okay.
The investor will get to build that home, and they get that return each year.
Okay.
But your rent would normally still be about 25% of your pension,
Okay.
and then that is what your normal rent would be.
And so the rent would go to you as well.
Yeah. So that 9,000.
Plus the rental, rental assistance as well.
Okay.
But it is preferable under SDA now to have your SDA standalone builder, developer, whatever, and have your SIL as a totally separate company.
Yes.
Designed by the tenants.
Yeah. Not big orgs down in New South Wales have done huge big schemes out in the Hunter Valley, whatever, and they're doing everything. But I think here, more appropriate for everybody is to have that independence. Yeah, all of that. And the other thing, you might think, oh God, it's a lot of money, but then we have to keep a sinking fund to make sure that those properties are constantly maintained, upgraded for life. So what the government's done is taken themselves out of like a Department of Housing, social housing model where they've, forever provided the housing, fixed whatever. I mean, I think it's innovative. It's it's pretty out there.
There's been no new housing built for years. And this is the best initiative that NDA has got. But the SDA actually, the payment actually belongs to the participant. It's in their plan.
Okay.
And that could move as their plan. But it depends where they decide to put it.
Okay.
With the SDA.
So if they were to move out of this SDA into another SDA, the money just moves with them.
Well, we haven't done that yet. We haven't got choice.
We haven't got there yet.
Please don't do that, Lynn.
But yes, that's the whole thing in place. Because it's given the person the opportunity now. And I mean, it still comes back to you could actually be your own SDA provider. If you're your own SDA provider and you've got your loan and everything else all sorted, and the actual participant is the owner of the property, you don't even pay tax on that.
And I think that's probably what I
And with the family, the family one is the new.
Yeah. So some people think, oh, I can get SDA, and I'm going to. So some people's partners think, oh, we'll go and get the SDA, and we'll be a property developer and build it, and then we'll take that SDA component back. But it doesn't work. You won't get that. So because it's about creating. The intention, this is an insurance scheme, we know there's a limitation of money, it's got to be spent wisely, it's got to have value for money. We have to spend $10,000 just to be registered, we have to be audited every year as a provider, as we all do. So you want best practice, you want everything to be tested and transparent. And because you're looking after people's lives, you're going to make sure that they're, so it's... as Lynn said, it's very innovative, it's very exciting, very individual.
Very individual to what it used to be.
And I think
1 to 3 is the maximum sort of under the price guide for an SDA as far as what the builder can get back. 1 to 4 is a virtually group home now.
Yeah, it's too big.
1 to 5 is just brown homes. 1 to 5 is ridiculous. It's way too big. Doing lived in that for 18 years. It's a disaster. But 1 to 2, and the other issue is the other priority is when you're doing plans as support coordinator, you must get it right in your actual plan. How many residents that the person wants to share with. There's too many issues going through at the moment where you're having a lot of with the Summer Foundation, their apartments, they're 2 bedrooms, 1 resident. Well, if you've got been approved in your plan for 1 bedroom, 1 resident, high physical supports, developers won't look at you very kindly because they won't get, they'll get more for that than what they will for the other way around. 2 bedrooms, 1 participant. It is very important that you have the correct participant number that you prefer to live with. We had an issue where our daughter was 1 to 3, and we went through a change of circumstances, and because these houses are 1 to 2 now, and she actually only wants to live 1 to 2. So we went through a change of circumstances, a big issue. We managed to get it back to 1 to 2, which is a higher percentage of return that the developer gets. But if you have the wrong number of participants in that plan, you can be tearing your hair out trying to...
So you're probably better trying to get a 2 to 1, and then you can have this free choice of saying, I'm happy to live with 3 to 1. But it's Lynn saying if you go 3 to 1, but you really can prove that for whatever... So we've got another client who's blind.
But the issue is when we put our change of circumstance in, and I still have not had it answered, is where does it state in the SDA rules legislation that NDIA has an obligation to determine how many people a person must live with? No one will answer that because there's none. And
the 2 to 1, 3 to 1, it's not kind of people live with not the level of
with one support worker.
Yeah, they might still have two to 1 people. Yeah, so that so often I might say something from a housing point of view, but the SIL will say something from a care point of view. So yeah.
1 to 2. When you look at the calculator, it's 1 to 2. 2 to 1. 2 to 1. Sorry, is if a participant needs 2 people under the SIL.
Under the SIL.
2 to 1. That's 1 to 2.
Yeah, sorry, it's the other way around. 1 to 2.
It's 1 to 2. But in the SIL, you have issues where the other participant needs 2 to 1 for transferring. So that comes in under the SIL, and that's got to go through the SIL. That's where the roster of care is virtually one of the most important documents now in housing, is to get the roster of care right so the SIL provider can be covered and supply the staff. For whatever hours, that the 1 participant may need 2 people for transfers, but the rest of the time, that time they're 2 to 1, but the rest of those evening hours they're 1 to 2. Okay. So, and then you've got your overnights and your different hours for rostering, and these guys are sort of being tearing their hair out because we're going to do SIL differently up here.
So
they're going to have
am
choices.
I understanding right? So if someone's 1 carer to 2 participants, that's more money return than 1 carer to 3 participants.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and I'm certainly not implying that MiHaven would...
Sorry, in the SDA...
It depends also, it depends what category they go to too. So improvability is, I don't know.
You just got to work out.
But there's the SDA pricing schedule, and you can just go through that. And there's a Excel sort of model that you can put it in, and because obviously to attract property funds to want to invest in this, they are looking for a return on their investment. And it's a brand new asset class that's been evolved through this scheme across Australia, which is exciting. But then, like anything new, the banks aren't really coming on board at the moment. They see it as high risk. They don't understand how it works. It's like, well, what's the alternate use to this house if the government blows up the NDIS? We know they're not going to blow up the NDIS, it can't, it's legislated. But there's all this, it's very new.
Like you said, you've got to get that number right in the
There's a
plan.
lot of issues in
What I'm
the
wondering
last
is,
couple of years where
would someone be disadvantaged if they
it
were
hasn't been.
classified as one parent to three,
when
as
they
opposed
really
to one
need
to two?
It's fair to be
Would
accepted.
someone
by
one
the
to
two.
two is going to get a spot over someone that's classified as one to three?
If the house is ready, depending on
It depends, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like so then there's a balancing act for us as a developer, because the cost of land has cost so much, and we can only get so much on. You know, some developers might try and put the carer upstairs because they think, oh well, then I can get more bedrooms downstairs and do that. Well, we know that's not practical. Why would you do that? I mean, that's just squeezing the envelope. So
Corporators hate it.
yeah, because you've got to keep going down.
As one of the planners, the head planners did, it's an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And when it
They don't
happens,
merge
it's
you
going to be
downstairs.
But you will see that in plans. You'll see shared bathrooms in plans. So I suppose, you know, we've benchmarked a lot of things differently in Cairns as a company, so we do pride ourselves on, it's not all about the money, it's actually about getting the right product on the ground and making sure that that house is going to have, you know, the best highest use.
1 to 2 and
1 to 3. And then we'll have the MTA as well, so we'll be able to sort of...
It's a matter of participants, and because we're different to cities. We've got a different mix of participants and all the rest of it, and there'll be other
Can I mention?
As a company, you guys will need to be audited all of the EIS regulations, etc. But when a house is SDA approved, is it approved for a particular period of time? And
So it's reviewed every year, so it's a huge process to get approved. So you go through your building, if you ever build a home, you get a building certifier signs off at the end. But in addition to that, you have to have an SDA certifier, so they have to be two completely separate companies, they can't be the same. So up until recently we didn't have that expertise, because you couldn't have the expertise because there was no houses here to certify. So we have been working with some Melbourne companies because they've been doing it for 5 years, and because of COVID we had to do the whole thing through Zoom. But finally a company here has finally got through their SDA certification at the moment. They'll piggyback with another company for us. So James, from a Rachel's perspective or Amy's perspective, they will look at this through another lens, basically, in the certification to what the building certifier is looking at.
Sure, it's a crossover from the Building Code of Australia to the NDIS design guideline. And in some instances, the SDA design guidelines override the building code, but the building code always overrides the SDA, and there's a lot of confusion about that. For instance, in the building code is the accessibility standard called 1428.1 and .2, which gives you the outline of how a disabled bathroom should be set up. And there's quite strict guidelines of how it should be set up. Whereas in the SDA design, it says backrests and handrails shall not, and shower seats shall not be put in. So under the SDA guidelines, I'm not allowed to fit a shower seat or a backrest on a toilet. Whereas the building surveyor comes in and says, well, you've got no backrest, you've got no shower seats, therefore I can't give you a certification. So I've then got to go to the access consultant, and they've got to write a Bible about why we don't want a shower seat and a backrest. You know, to an OT, it's quite obvious why they don't. But so I've got to spend $2,000 to get an access consultant to write an 80-page document to say why we can bypass 1428 in the building code. So there's all those sort of anomalies that will sort out over time, I think. You know, we can't keep going on giving people $2,000 to write a performance criteria basis on something.
And I think where we're definitely a unique company is that so James and I came from a project management background with Modification and town planning, and James has had all the history in buildings. So in-house we do our design, our town planning, all our building construction documentation. We've got our own full-time architects, so we have all of that expertise in our little building. And then we have a construction team that's been with us for 10 years now, so we're very much in control on site every day what's going on. What's the one? And we're local. Thanks, Lynn. And we're very local. So, but I'm just saying, it's paid off all the way through. So, you know, the SDA consultant's been on the phone to James. We've gone out to site and we've gone, wow, 3 millimetres we could have been out, and 1 millimetre. The other reason why it's so important to have the co-design and the relationship with the participants and the support coordinators and the OTs early is there'll be a little nuance, like Lynn knows, you know, the bidet, right? So that's not a standard in a bathroom design, but that's a hardwired piece of equipment. And there's only one opportunity to get that in, and it's at the frame stage. Otherwise, you're ripping out wall systems and all sorts of things to get in. That's a $10,000 mistake. It's kind of...
Donald Rumsfeld, you've got the knowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. We've got to design to the unknown unknowns. Because when we start building, we haven't got our participants lined up.
We may not.
So we've got a wire for everything we can think of. So we just sort of think out of the box and think, right, we've got to design to the highest ability we can to support high physical support. So we've got to put PowerPoints in for doors, for windows, for bidets, for nurse call, for everything. But we mightn't use all that, but at least the work wires are in there.
They're behind the wall. Yeah. And there's...
As Sarah said, you know, people are getting bigger and wheelchairs are getting bigger. So what is in the SDA requirements now might be there next year. So we've got to think, wow, do we go and put 1.2 metre doors in? Do we do it now?
So it's very challenging. I mean, I even know a few buildings here that are built to the platinum standard and then been audited 2 years later and been told they failed, and they can't afford to fail because they spent $15 million being built. So, and it might be just over the pathway, you know, the angle of that pathway being out by 5 mil or something. So they're very strict.
Sorry, you touched on robust design earlier. Is that a space you can look at?
We will definitely look into it because we know there's such a need. I mean, I have to say, when I came out of working with ARC July last year, and then I was asked to set up this SDA forum, so there was a small group of us, 4 or 5, once a month we'd get together and share. And I have to say that 3/4 of that meeting always got into mental health and the biggest need of housing in Cairns. And they kept saying, Sarah, can you come up with a model for this? And I'm going, yeah, I just got to work out how this works first. So we fully acknowledge, and we are a social enterprise, and you know, we do have the ability to access social impact funding out of a lot of investment groups in Australia, so which is unique because to be Cairns based and to get southern investors into the property market here is not always easy, because I just see that we're so far away from the rest of the world. Although I think we all acknowledge at the moment we're very blessed to be here with COVID. So yeah, I think I get excited about, you know, in a regional location where you can collaborate. I think we can innovate and think outside of the box and trial and pilot different ideas. Where in a big city it sort of gets a bit lost, and the land price is so expensive to access, and then the housing needs, everybody's got issues. So yeah, we would love to do a bit of a think tank, like a co-design idea about what types of robust housing models will work. So how does that care work? How does the SIL support work? What things don't we know about that we need to?
Robust Australian wide. I mean, there's parents I talk to all the time, Melbourne, Sydney. They've had SDA robust agreements for 2 years. The builders are quoting $1 million for one, and they're usually 120. And the builders are quoting $1 million to build an ordinary standard, but it's robust house. And it's just an absolute nightmare. Just no.
And the funding for robust is less than it's less than physical. It's less than high physical, which really, when you look at the mechanics of the costing of running it and building it, and it's the maintenance as well. So I think there's going to be a bit of a pushback in the industry to say to the NDS, you've got your pricing models wrong. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a wrap. I'd like to.
I just before you do that, sorry, Paul, was there any comments? No. Okay, great.
So I'd just like to congratulate Anneke and Sarah for putting this on. As Sarah said, a year ago she was involved emotionally and physically in this area, and it got to the point where she couldn't do it anymore. I said, stop, it's you can't do it. So we walked away from this realm, and then came back to it in a hell of a hurry, thanks to you, Bill, because there is such a need, and we feel compelled to fill that need to the best of our ability. And along with that, we've got to finance the thing. We've got to design it to the codes. We've got to get through that maze of the codes. We've got to build it to a price where it's affordable. And then we've got to get the thing financed into a fund so we can keep going. So, but at the end of it, we've got to come back to saying we've got to get people in need into these houses, because it is very emotional to see people mistreated in somewhere they are, and to try and get them out of that. So really it's a very interesting, satisfying place to be, and you guys are all in that space, and I applaud you, because wow, it's full of stuff that a lot of people walk away from. So congratulations everybody, congratulations you guys, but we're in it to get people into housing. That's why we're in it. So let's all work together to make that happen as quickly as possible in Cairns and other places.
Thanks, James. Just two things to be mindful of. Rian Lomas has come up from Brisbane. Rian and virtually his whole family worked with James and I at one point in time. His father was our head architect, and all the kids came through our business. And then Rian found out on LinkedIn that we'd moved into SDA. So Rian's into plan management, so I might let Rian speak 5 minutes about what he's doing in that space. And the other acknowledgement is also we are a training school. We're a really unusual company. We're a builder, developer, and we're also an RTO. And we do train in disability, and we deliver the Cert 3 disability and aged care. We do all of that face to face. We've got programs going down in Innisfail, in Cairns. We've had a lot of support carers come to us and workers saying we haven't got quals. I've got a lot of friends who are trying to get out of tourism, have lost their jobs, who are looking at repurposing where they could go. We know this is a huge growth area in working. So we actually have that course now going onto a Moodle platform as well. So anyway, I'm just plugging that so you know that we're an RTO specialising in this, so it's just another add-on to that. Marine, did you want to say anything about plan management?
Yeah, so your plan partner, and I sort of got involved in this space through the business partner whose ex-wife had MS, and he saw a lot of difficulty in just trying to get people onto the NDIS and how that was working as well. So your plan partner, we're a dedicated plan management business, and we're trying to be a little bit more personalised than what we've heard some other plan managers can be in terms of who do I contact, who I speak to, who do I ask questions about my plan as well. So I grew up here in Cairns and here 20-something years. I know sometimes it takes a little longer for things from down south to get up here, and people have the choice of services they would otherwise have. So your plan partner, we're based down in Brisbane, but with plan management we try and be pretty diverse with it and give people as much access to what they want to do and give them a mobile number to call if they've got any questions. And so yeah, so if anyone wants to have a bit of a chat, I'd love to learn as well if there's any difficulties that people are having up in this space in plan management, what we can also do to help as well.
Are the company is based in Brisbane, but are you up here, or is there any contact from your plan partners up here?
I'll be up here pretty regularly, but I'm down in Brisbane as well, but I'm sort of travelling around and want to get out to regional areas as well, because I know what it can be like sometimes.
Yeah. So when you're up here, will you do face-to-face with participants?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and we hand our mobile numbers out directly to participants as well, because we want to encourage them to ask questions.
And Rian's business partner Luke has really clear that all that equipment and all that specialty stuff is all part of your plan. So I'd like to thank you all for your valuable time and sharing your time with us today. I hope it was informative. If you want to ask any questions, any more questions, happy to do so.
Yeah, I've got a question for sort of three parts to it. Who owns the house? First of all, what's the security of tenancy for the people living there? And what sort of dispute resolution things are in place if
Sure.
there's conflict between, if it's a shared space?
Yeah, so good questions. So we will own the houses in a property fund. So we will be the manager for the properties. So it will be dealing with us. Under the NDIS, you have to get certified to be an SDA property manager, which is what we are. Under that requirement, there is a whole enormous amount of documentation about the protection of the rights of the tenant. Every state's different, so Victoria's actually written its own legislation for SDA tenancy agreements. That's not in Queensland. In Queensland, we will fall under the RTA lease, so same rights as we would have if we were renting a house. Our student accommodation runs under the same system, so every single student has an RTA lease. They have all the protections under the RTA legislation requirements under leasing. But then there's more levels to that collaboration, as I said, under the SDA management. So we, as a property manager, have to actually engage with the SIL and the participants at least quarterly in a structured meeting. There has to be registers of any complaints or any issues or anything. Everything has to be recorded. You are then audited every single year as the SDA property manager over all your registrations and all your processes and procedures. So the lease agreement can be anything from a year to 10 years. So a lot of clients really would like to be able to say, well, I'm committing to that for good, because it's my home. But for whatever, if some circumstances change, they don't want to live there anymore, or they pass away, obviously there's a break clause, like you have if you're leasing a house at the moment, and you have a 2-month period where you can give notice that you want to break. And then obviously our role then is to make sure we fill that vacancy and make sure we match that vacancy with the right housemate. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to be done.
So when somebody applies for SDA funding, is it for a period of time, or?
They have it for life. So if you get SDA approved.
Sarah, could you just repeat the question just for the people online, because they're not actually hearing?
Repeat this gentleman's?
Yes, it's the question.
So the question was a lot about the property management side of it. So A, who owns the property? B, what sort of protections are there for the participant as to what sort of lease agreement, what happens if there's a dispute, how do they break a lease, how long is a lease for? Was that clear, Paul? So the answer to that is we've got to be Queensland Pacific, because in every state it can be quite different as far as what the legislation is. But currently in Queensland we fall under the RTA, Residential Tenancy Agreement. And so each participant will enter into a lease agreement with the property owner. It doesn't, I mean, you could find an SDA developer and it could be yourself, you could go and build it and lease it out. But in our model, we will have a property fund that will own all the houses and we'll be acting on behalf of that fund to manage the properties. As I was saying just before, we have to be registered. We have to be SDA property managed registered. So I think Access Housing is probably the only other one that got registered. About a year ago, it was very easy to get your registration. You just had to go online and fill out forms. Not like that anymore. It's been over a year for me to get RSDA management registration through the NDIS. So you have to go through complete audit checks. You have to have all your policies and procedures. Your staff have to be trained in not just property management, but people management to do with property. And then there is a whole list, which I'm happy to share, as to all the sorts of agreements that we have to have. So I have to have a collaboration agreement with SIL. So I also am a little bit of a watchguard with the SIL, because I want to make sure that SIL's performing to the best standard, looking after the people in the house, because also I want the house to be well managed. I want to make sure I don't walk into the house and there's trip hazards, or it's a mess, or there's wet towels on the floor, or it's just hasn't been looked after. So there's lots of policies and procedures and checks. The lease time can be, as I said, could be a year to 10 years. I think most people's preferences will be about 5 years plus, because they're basically saying, this is my home and I want to stay here. But if they choose not to be there anymore for whatever reason, then it's no different to breaking a lease as you would have with your normal tenancy agreement in Queensland, which is a 2-month.
So they could take that SDA funding that
they can take that with them. It's with them for life. They could move to Melbourne with it. They could move to Tasmania with it. Which is a little bit one of the reasons why I think Anneke and I, and we don't know, but there does seem to be a lot of pushback on home modifications, because a home modification, really, to do it properly, if you're in that really high physical support, could be upwards of $250,000. And if you're the panel making that assessment, you'd have to ask yourself, is that mortgage free? Is that client going to stay in that house for the rest of their life, or is the family going to sell it on them, and then we've done this renovation, and then to what? So that's why I think the modification could be quite a challenging thing getting through. I think if you've had an accident and it's your home, and you can prove to the panel that it's your home, you've probably got a good chance. But you did have a client wanting to move up from Adelaide to Cairns and wanted a home modification done to the house to come to Cairns. I think there could have been a question mark of saying, well, what if you don't like Cairns?
True.
So,
and there's lots of old houses in Cairns, and they're trying to get me as the OT in a rattly old Queenslander to put in a ceiling hoist, and I think James
the house will fall down.
It's not gonna give.
And you've got to have a 400 kilogram rating.
Yeah.
Queensland.
If you look inside where we're building, there are still beams going right around the whole corner of every bedroom. Like there'd be $10,000-$20,000 worth of steel just holding that up. So we know that we can lift someone up to 150 kilos, but a normal home could 400 kilos.
Yeah.
So a normal home could never do that. Yeah.
Individuals and organisations could theoretically buy land, get an SDA approved builder, build a house, get it approved by an SDA approval person. Like if it was, say, someone wanted to build a home for their family members who were qualified for SDA, what is that?
They could take the risk of building the house, and it costs a lot more to build. Okay, so you're probably talking double the money, up to $1 million to build the house, but then they couldn't manage it unless they went and got themselves to be registered to manage, but you wouldn't do it because you wouldn't want to go and spend $10,000 to get yourself registered to look after one house.
And that's exactly why I deregistered from my audit in December, because it was going to cost just
So there's only you and another...
Oh, look, there's people, if you go onto the Housing Hub, like there's websites you can go to where all over Australia people register that they're in SDA, that they're building SDA. Like it's really growing as an asset class. We would be probably the most advanced local organisation in Cairns that is where we are on this journey, but we've invested an enormous amount of time to get to where we are. And I mean, there's nothing stopping a developer going off and saying, I'm going to go and employ an architect that knows how to design an SDA home and go and spec an SDA home and then put it out to the market on the Housing Hub and say, here it is, but they'd still have to go and find an SDA property manager to manage it for them. And that's not to say that can't be done either. So it's a free market. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing it, but there's a lot of barriers in that system that you need. That's why I was saying, initially last year when Art asked me to come and have the conversation, by the end of the year I went, oh, this is really hard. I mean, if I thought student accommodation was hard, this is taking it to another level.
And guess who used to take all those phone calls? I did.
Yeah.
A lot of free love.
You know, COVID enabled us to have the headspace to say, well, actually we're a company that cares about what we do. We love design, we love doing things which are different, so maybe that's, we have the skill set to do it. We're very lucky because we've got an architect who's young that we've trained up right from the beginning, so we've got that intelligence in our business. I think it's a really expensive process when you've got to keep outsourcing to consultants, but that's how most developers would do. They'd go out and find specialists to go and design it and build it. So, yeah.
And a lot of the developers out there, I'm finding they're just wanting to have their contract straight up when the process doesn't work like that. As these guys.
And if you take that risk, you'll find you'll have a lot of vacancy.
Yeah.
And then the thing's then not successful, and then you've got people living on their own, not sharing and not being properly managed. So, yeah.
Happy to chat about it.
Hello.
Two questions. So then the participant is renting from you guys, and they'll be paying rent.
So their rental contribution, like from their pension, comes out, and that goes to the house, and then their SDA fund goes directly to the owner. Because, as I'm saying, this is a very innovative approach by the federal government to have rolled this sort of asset class out for housing, because there's a huge expense. You're talking about houses that don't really have an alternate use. So there's a risk of saying, what happens when the money runs out and the government wants to disband the NDIS or whatever, God forbid, but, if it did, what do we do with this asset class? How do we get a return on our investment? So that's why it's so important to understand that once you get your SDA, that is for you for life, and I don't think there's any way you could break that down. What was your next one?
That's why the eligibility is so tough.
Yeah, that's why the eligibility is so tough. Yeah. And the other part of that too is, from a property point of view, to be a responsible property owner, you have to have a sinking fund. So in collecting that rent, it might look like, oh God, this is a huge bucket of money, but it's cost about $1 million to $1.5 million to build a house, which would normally be $300,000. And then you've got to make sure, like with the fire systems, there's a $10,000 upgrade every year just to keep that compliant. And then a house of the tropics, as we know, it's a constant maintenance. So you've got to make sure that everything's maintained, that there's no slippage on the concrete pathways, just everything else that goes into it.
Is rent under SDA predetermined on your income?
Your SDA, which is not your rent, but the SDA contribution is determined on what level of physical disability you have. So if you're high physical support, that's the highest level. Don't quote me, but say it's $35,000 or $40,000 a year. Then there's a location factor. So Cairns has a 1.2 location factor. So it's slightly a little bit more because it's obviously recognising that you're outside the mainstream of the cities. And then if you put the sprinkler systems in, there's a slightly more leverage on the contribution for that. And then you have your rental contribution, which is your disability pension. So that's your rent. So you do pay that rent, and then you have shared costs. So if you and I are living together, we've still got to split the power bill, and that's why we've gone and spent an extra, say, $10,000 or $20,000 putting solar in there, because actually we're going to save you money on the way through, because by putting solar in, your power bill is going to come down. And I've heard some really nutty things about how they split bills, but they're the things that we're going to try to be very smart about doing that up front, where we will probably put the power and the MVN and everything into just the company name, and then just have an agreement with the household as to how we share that and split that.
So have your question about the rent. Would it be similar to Department of Housing rent?
Yes. Yes.
25% of your...
It's about $9,266 a year currently, something like that. Yeah.
And with that, do they not eligible for rental assistance from Centrelink?
No, I think they get all of those. There's 3 levels. Whatever they currently get comes with them. That doesn't get touched at all. Yeah. So the extra money coming through the SDA is really the government.
You don't get rental assistance? No.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So no, this would be the same as if you're going into the mainstream housing market. So that's what you'd be paying. But the higher amount of money coming out of the SDA plan to the property owner is really acknowledgement by the government, because otherwise the government would have to be buying all this housing and owning this housing. And as we know, it's not really, for a lot of states in Australia, the Department of Housing is not building the volume of housing it used to, because it becomes almost a negative asset class for them, because they can't repurpose it, and yeah, so.
So then a participant moves out?
Yes.
Because I guess leading up to this, you're working with an identified client and designing for their needs and things like that. But then essentially like years down the track, you've got the property established, someone moves out, there's like a room vacancy. For someone else to move in, they are just needing to be deemed eligible for...
They'd go the same process the very first person had to go through to get into that house. So that's why I'm saying from a community point of view, and that's where we work quite well in Cairns, is sharing information. So first up with Lily at community at Mercy Care, we're trying to build a database now to get everybody registered, de-identified, but actually working out where are they, what do they need, where are they on their journey with getting their SDA. It would help work out where the capacity is for support with OTs. But then, as we move on, obviously it'd be great to have a register of, there'll be a website, whatever, that we would work on, as saying there's a vacancy coming up, just like it does at the moment, where you're trying to get a SIL or something, you're ringing Kutharinga or Endeavour and saying, has anyone got a spare room? Or Kelly's saying, I've got to get people out of the hospital, is there any availability? And we're not going to go crazy about how many houses we build. We will build to the market, and when we think that we've built enough to the market to sustain the market, then hopefully there's a natural attrition that comes through as to people moving into Cairns, leaving, change of circumstance, yeah. But yeah, I mean, going back to what Kat's saying, that eligibility criteria is so stringent and so strict and so hardly tested that there'll be very much a limit to the number of people, so therefore there will be a limit to the number of houses, because the government won't have a bucket load of money to keep just pouring into this sector. I mean, it's an enormous investment they've made, which is great, but it will get to the point where they go, well, that's as much as we can.
There's new participants coming into this scheme.
Yeah, exactly, and that changes circumstance and people.
But it is only a small market, therefore.
But it's such a big change from the last 50 years, which is you just go to a group home or a institution, or you just get stuck at home. What this is doing is giving people such an incredible opportunity of living independently. Yeah.
Keeping that conversation going, and talking to the NDIS and talking to other people about it.
I guess the benefit of the previous system, notwithstanding, is that there was a sense of information flow that was centralised, which is when you go to a private market, socialist for me, you have a lot of other things to contend with when you're trying to look at identifying the client group, the matching, and also dealing with individual private businesses in terms of who they have for their clients, and making sure as a government entity that people have full access to choose who they want to have as their support coordinators or service provider, all those sorts of things. So it does add extra complexity when we've got people that we know predominantly at that very high level, and not necessarily just all spinal injury. They'll come from spinal injury unit in PA, but we have high-level strokes that don't get down there, ABI, which is functionally have mobility issues that are very heavy. And so hypoxic brain injuries, all of our ABIs that are not necessarily mobilising, and high-level behavioural that we will see that are stuck in that acute sector, because the capacity for where they're going to is quite limited. So we're a pipeline that Sarah's identified, but we're also ensuring that a website to be able to identify that this is likely to be where they're going when they first get their first plan.
Yeah, I mean, to save time and to streamline, that's why we're trying to have the conversations now. So the more information that's shared around within the community, people go, okay, I know where to go now, or I didn't know that was an opportunity, or I didn't know.
It helps us to know if that support coordinator knows what the other options are. Then we know that they'll be able to try to maximise for their client.
But also, like Kelly, when we had our last meeting, you identified a client that at the moment the sister was taking the whole burden on taking her brother out, and then she was going to go through the whole process of trying to get the home modification done to her home, which is her home at the end of the day. If something happens to him, she's then got this house, which is probably not to the purpose of what she wants at the end of the day. So she didn't realise there's an opportunity to talk about, well, maybe there's another pathway for accommodation that would be more suitable.
And there's so many sitting in cells that aren't aware of SDA, families and rest homes, and I'm not affiliated with any provider, so I can say this, and a lot of the time they don't tell them because there is profit for them in maintaining that cell, so we need to have those conversations. Yeah.
And we're mindful that it's a transition. The hospital isn't going to get you straight into an SDA.
No.
But that conversation in terms of those opportunities need to be started so that there's an MTA and then still potentially, and you maximising SDAs as well, because we're trying to move people out of hospital quicker and identifying public housing if we've got a date. So we can get an MTA because they've got timelines.
And then you're working with a public trustee for a lot of clients in hospital, and that has all sorts of red tape that's got to go through before a support coordinator can be identified or approached. Families have had catastrophic accidents and have no idea what the NDIS is all about anyway, so where do you start the conversation there?
Plus all of the hidden. So people we never see in the hospital until the ageing parents come into hospital and their main carers having some support, and then it's like, oh, okay, there's a big thing. Yeah.
And my
big area out there.
Yeah, my first option was SDA. I didn't go any lower. I'm just like, righto, let's get SDA, and that was 2 years ago, and no one was talking about it back then. Absolutely no one. So.
But it's interesting because I've seen lots of conversation around it, but people not knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Talking about.
Were we like that today?
And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. You're not going to be eligible. Yes, we are. We're spoken to someone and they told no.
False hope. That's why it's so important to share that, because it's 30 hours out of their plan. It's a couple of $1,000 that's been, that may.
People hear things and then they run with it, or someone might give them misinformation.
Yeah.
And someone on Facebook told me I could get SDA.
Yeah.
So everybody's eligible for SDA, and it's heartbreaking when you speak to people and say, no, you're not.
True.
You're not going to meet that need.
Get a consultant involved, and then
So it's, making sure that we get the right information. And if you don't know, pass it on to somebody who has that expertise. Throw some dollars to someone. Pass it on to the right person.
True.
If you don't know, ask or
share.
Yeah. I have a lot of those conversations, don't worry.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. So before we wrap, is there any other key questions, burning questions? Otherwise, you've got my phone number, email. More than happy to meet one-on-one and get conversations going. We're open to any ideas. We're quite expansive in our thinking. We still have a little group going with Kelly and Yvette and Lily at the moment. We're building this Google Live document that Lily's taken charge of. So when that goes, we'll send that out. We'll share this package to you all tomorrow. That's got the linkages to all these documents we've talked about. And James just wants to say a few words.
Well, just thank you for coming, and I hope in some way that's given you some knowledge. We're still learning, Cairns is still learning, and we're trying our best to keep abreast of this sort of shifting sands of SDA. We'll be very excited to open Lily Street in about 3 weeks' time. It's going like a train at the moment. And I know, living with my fellow director, she got involved with this a year ago.
I'm actually his wife, by the way, just in case I hadn't worked it out.
We got to the end of the year, and Sarah was exhausted with the emotional energy that she had to spend in this sector, and we sort of walked away from it. And then, with insistence upon some people, Sarah got back into it, and we said, righto, let's jump in, let's do this. But if we're going to do it, like everything else we do, we want to do it to the best of our ability. So this is, you know, small little seminar is some way of disseminating information between us all. And, you know, it's a great thing we're all doing, and I think we all should work together, because what we want to do at the end of the day is get people in proper accommodation, out of accommodation that doesn't suit them, and give people a real shot at living the way they want to live. So that's what we're about, that's what you guys are about, so let's keep working together. We can't work in silos to make this happen. We're going to work together, so let's keep sharing information.
We'll do it again. You know, this is the first time I've done it, and what the breakaway from this morning was, there's such a big need for this robust conversation. So we're thinking we might just do a bit more of a workshop on that dialogue. Paul, you got your hand up?
Just shout out to Andrew Johnson down in Melbourne. He's pretty envious of us all sitting up here without masks on.
That's very cute.
But she's just trying to navigate the whole system at the moment as a parent. And she's been watching the show today, so thank you very much for on the other computer. She's been doing an OT session on the computer with the jars on it. So,
Okay. The other tiny plug, I have to do it, MiHaven training. We have an RTO. We're very locally based. I think we're now in about 50% of all the schools in Cairns teaching. And our business is very diversified culturally. And we train in disability. And Ray, you're one of our students. So we do face-to-face mostly, but we are taking the disability training, the Cert 3, which many people will be eligible for that, funded by the government. There's a tiny contribution, about $150. And I mean, Ray, from your point of view, you said to me the other day that, tell me what you said about why.
Well, I just think for, eventually I've been a caseworker, and eventually I'd like to work in coordinating. But it was good to go and do the training from the bottom, basically.
Yeah.
And learn about it, and I'm looking forward to being a support carer and then a coordinator. I think it's important to have a good overall knowledge.
Yeah, and you said to me, like, I'm really glad that I just got exposed to it from a training perspective, because it is there's a barrier to this industry. There's a fear factor about what this industry is about. And it's actually got huge opportunity career-wise. And with the impact of COVID on the tourism and hospitality industry up here, there are a lot of people that are going to be really suited to work in this space. It's got a huge burnout rate, we know that. But we need more. If we grow the houses, we're going to need more SIL support, we're going to need more people qualified, and it's recognised in Australia as one of the biggest growth industries from an employability point of view. I mean, you guys as OTs are seeing that. So just sharing that we have this, extensive training program that we can offer to anybody that's got staff or whatever that would do with a little bit more fine tuning.
Oh, good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.